Oh, I just said Mother Nature's actually given us everything we need. It works perfectly. We don't need to add to it. We don't need to manage it. We just need to work with it and be part of it. That video was good. Yeah, that's what it showed.
Can I possibly just open up for discussion regarding whether anybody's interested in having the intentional community and whether anyone has any farming or growing experience?
Well, why don't we ask people to put their hand up? Right, I'll put my hand up. Anybody else want to put their hand up? Nobody.
Yeah. Yes. No, I'll put my hand up. My name's Michaela. My screen name's Prana. Can you hear me?
Oh, you put the thumb.
Excellent.
Did I put my, okay, cool. I just unmuted myself. All right. Well, does anyone else want to go first?
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Anyone else? Does anybody else want to go first?
Yeah. Well, we've reached a point where I can open it for discussion. Just before we do that, there is a lot more information I can share, and we could possibly do another evening, maybe a Friday or a Monday. There's a section on divine purpose for humans, and that's to nurture the earth and improve the soil. There's multiplying this model not just once, but 10,000s, millions of times worldwide. I've got some very powerful information on how to do that. There's also going to be other speakers. Watch out for those. And if you want to, I've got a donation link because we haven't taken the step to go for the government handouts. There might be strings attached, and there's some pretty big government handouts. At this stage, we haven't. Anyway, oh, there's a section I haven't covered, and that's the code of conduct. How about we throw open questions, and maybe I'll get back onto the code of conduct once it settles down. Does anybody have a question so far? Turn on your audio and speak.
Okay, can I speak?
Who's that?
Hello, Fariba.
Fariba, how are you?
Good, thanks. Now, just quickly, I'm wondering, you know, with this land, it's only land, and you want to start to construct this village from scratch. Is that correct?
Like a village?
So there is nothing on it?
Possibly. It doesn't have to be. If we start communicating, sharing ideas, there are other cooperatives that want to kick off. They tend to be in the hinterland areas where it's perpetually warm and stinking hot quite often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, I'm just wondering, you know, because you know, $30,000 for 3 hectares is a really reasonable price to me, regardless if I have it or not. That is another matter. But then, you know, you have to consider all the work that it gets, and you know, all this construction that has to happen for even to have a hut. And you know, I'm a 64-year-old woman that I never had, you know, I'm not a very strong bone person, and I'm wondering if that, you know, this sort of scenario is suitable for someone like me. But I was thinking, if this is just there are lots of villages that they used to be, maybe I'm not quite sure where, to be honest, but you know, I think, you know, probably there are some deserted villages, or that they were mining places or something like that, that you know, the properties, they can be really cheap and also empty, but there is some sort of infrastructure there. Is there any possibility to, you know, to create a community there? Because for me, it's just to be part of an intelligent community. And I'm not a hippie, I tell you. I'm, you know, my background is not, you know, I'm not that down to earth, you know, but I'm a practical person. and I like to live ethically. And so I'm wondering, if that is something that, any one of you thought about, or there are possibilities to look at something that is not really that from the scratch, because then, how are we going to create these huts? I think that is a big question mark for me.
Sure. I mean, if anybody's got some suggestions along your proposal, or you might have do some research for yourself and bring it to the group. By all means.
Because I love the settings, and I used to live in a rural, and I built my own house. So, I'm very familiar with the difficulty of construction from zero.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering also about the practicality of the whole thing and the cost that is involved anyway, because you need the material, not everybody is able to, you have to engage someone to do it. So yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I just thought, if how this community is planning to set up the farm, and what are the sort of ideas or ideals that they're in your mind, or the mind of people that because the idea is fantastic, but how realistic for everybody is, I mean, not everybody, for me, I'm just questioning. And if you can give me some sort of information about that.
All right, well, do your research, and perhaps we can hear from anybody else who's got some suggestions.
I just think that's a very pertinent line of questions that you put out there, Fariba. I think it's very relevant. We need to kind of discuss how we would actually accomplish this. So I'm just going to add that and drop out for a minute and let everyone else pitch in their 2 cents on this.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Michaela again. Can you hear me?
Who's that?
Michaela. This is Michaela. I'm here in Ringwood North.
Yep.
Victoria. So yeah, so it sounds like a wonderful idea, but I agree with Fariba. There needs to be like a lot of planning, a lot of infrastructure. I used to live in northern New South Wales, and I've done a lot of woofing, which is willing workers on organic farms. So I've actually lived and worked on a lot of organic farms and communities.
Yep.
Going back 20 years ago. So mostly in northern New South Wales. I've seen some of intentional communities that are quite well operating, and I've also seen some that are quite dysfunctional. It's a massive, massive undertaking. It's a massive project. It can definitely be done. I've also spent time on the Permaculture Institute in Tyalgum. I was lucky enough to meet Bill Mollison, the founder of Permaculture, back in the 90s, end of the late 90s, when I was 17 years old. I'm now 41. And I've seen what's possible with creating a permaculture and a food forest, and with a lot of incredible strategic design and a lot of hard work, you can definitely, this is possible. But yeah, starting from scratch, huge undertaking, and it would need to be very highly organized model with a lot of agreements, and of course legal agreements. So I think I'm wanting to see a lot more strategic framework in place before I would actually go into a project like this. It sounds like an amazing opportunity, amazing project, but yeah, I think something that needs to have more concrete plans put in place if it's going to actually come into fruition and actually be a practical endeavor for people. So I'm wondering if you have any actual planned documents of plans in place for this community.
In answer to your question, yes, there's heaps, right?
Oh, fantastic.
It hasn't been, well, there are some aspects which are online, but in general, it hasn't been released. In a way, there are some enormous impediments from local councils. Theoretically, you can only put 1 or 2 dwellings on a property. It doesn't matter how big it is. Now, how's that going to work? Now,
right.
There have been communities, though, particularly in New South Wales, been set up with multiple occupants, and it got so popular in New South Wales that they even introduced legislation to control it.
Right.
Now,
I've read up.
What I don't really like is conforming to that legislation. And
right, but the reality is, I just read actually an article the other day about an intentional community. I think it was in Queensland.
Yep.
And people invested their life savings into it. They built homes. Things were not properly council approved, and the council essentially and the government came in there and kicked people off the land. They demolished their houses. I mean, it was a nightmare for people, and people came out of it basically losing their life savings. So you have to learn from experiences that other people have gone through and learn from the mistakes other people have made and go, okay, well, we need to absolutely protect ourselves from any scenario like that happening. And you pretty much do have to do things by council code if you want to not have them come in and interfere down the track, because trust me, they will at some point. It might take them 10 years, but the government has their agenda, and if you don't follow their rules, they will come in and interfere. And I've seen it happen.
Yeah, I can see that. And I'm sorry, just, this idea just came to my mind. There are these empty villages that usually they're a mine. They used to be, mining little deserted villages. They have an infrastructure. And also from the point of view of looking after the land, these are devastated lands. So actually it's not a bad idea to start something like this that also has such a spiritual component in it, to be, and, to maybe just, help the land to build up, and, also use the existing things that are in these villages, and also not to deal with the council for all these things. And just, I don't know. This is just, some idea that came to my mind, because I don't know how practical it is and where these villages are. One has to do the research and all that. But I agree with you. Sooner or later, they come to every single place that they can put their hands on, and to create problem. Yeah, I can see that happening.
So I actually really like your idea. I've actually been researching some places in Tasmania.
Right.
They're pretty remote though, and there are some areas that the land and the housing is super cheap. We're talking, like under 30,000, 30,000 for a block of land, or like even up to 3-bedroom houses for, around 100,000. But they are very remote places, and they usually are mining towns. Now, they could be still active mining towns, so that's probably not ideal. But you also have to consider if the area has it could have toxic chemical residues in the soil.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a former mining area. Most people know about Queenstown, Victoria. It's a moonscape. It was devastated by mining. That's just one example. I do like how creative your idea is, and I'd love to do more research on that. But it would be good to get a property that already does have some kind of housing infrastructure, because starting from scratch is a huge undertaking. And then I did want to talk about the tiny house movement, and
yes, that is another thing. Yes.
Yeah, the council regulations. It really depends on the council, but for a lot of councils in Australia, I've done my research, and They're considered caravans if they're on wheels. And technically, you're not allowed to live in a caravan for longer than, I think, 2 months out of every calendar year. So that if they're on a foundation, though, you can live in them as a house. But then the regulation, then you have to have everything council approved. Whereas if it's a tiny house on wheels, then you don't have to have council regulations like you normally do. But then you've got the limitation of, hey, you can only live on it technically for 2 months a year. So it's all getting around all these strict regulations, which are very limiting. But yeah, you basically have to find loopholes and find ways around them, or find a council that is more progressive and is more, has changed the laws to accept tiny houses. So it's really tricky in that way. So yeah, it does come down to, is the land and the council that you're in, are their regulations going to suit your purposes? Are they going to suit what you actually want to do with an intentional community? Because if they're not supportive of it, you're basically going to just come across so many roadblocks, and it's just going to be, you basically have to find a council where it's all going to work the way you want it to work. Otherwise, you're just going to hit too many roadblocks.
I'll mention that the group that I'm referring to does have land. They do have buildings, right? And if you do things quietly and cleverly, right? There's a concept of a dwelling, of a super dwelling. You can have a house or some other structure like a conference center with dozens of bedrooms, and it's still only classified as one dwelling.
Okay.
I call those super dwellings. And in which case, that's fairly easy to set up. Right? I'd love the idea of natural housing, but you might find that metal shed housing can be put up and the permits are already done for you. Right? They fit together like a Meccano set, and they provide, one building can provide all the kitchen and the bathroom facilities that are required, and there can be actually be bedrooms scattered in the landscape, as long as they don't have technically have a kitchen. They're not a dwelling. They're just a room. They're just a bedroom.
Very impractical. It's very impractical. You can do that for a while, but I think if you want to live there permanently, I think every person needs to have also their own privacy. Maybe just their own kitchen or bathroom. I don't know if that how. I mean, you have to be. That is, to me, is just a desperate measure. To be honest, is not my first preference.
If I can just say something to that. I mean, we do have microwaves and other stones, and there are ways of having a kitchen without the government finding out. In some ways, I mean, I remember we stayed in Peru in a place where there were individual bedrooms and there was a communal kitchen. It was a lovely way of coming together.
That works.
So I hear what you're saying, Fariba. Privacy is important. Yeah. On the other hand, though, there's something beautiful about having your privacy, your own bedroom, and your ability to make a cup of tea, whatever, but also coming together in the kitchen. That can
could work. Yeah, it did work well in
can
Peru.
Work very well to connect people.
But before you go, Michaela, I'm impressed. You obviously have a wealth of knowledge, more than anyone I've met, and when it comes to just everything you've said. Taking everything into consideration, I think both of you and Fariba are absolutely right in terms of just the
long term
take in the council. However, I know we all want to be creators here, but look, I'm not going to deny we've got a problem. Sorry everybody, but we may have a collapse economy on our hands. We do need to address that in a practical way and not put our heads in the sand and turn away from what's actually happening. I have to do something. I don't know about everybody else. I do need to plan, and that's how I operate. Not out of fear, but I just look at what's happening and I like to respond to that in a practical way, and that means having a plan B, planning for the best, preparing for the worst. That's how I do things.
Yeah, exactly. The same here. Planning for the worst, but also to be also realistic about, you know, who, you know, how much I can cope, you know, with my age, and also for the longer term, because we are not getting, you know, I'm 64. I just turned 64.
Okay.
So, you know, so,
congratulations.
Thank you. So, I mean, if this is
Yeah.
planned for the rest of my life, you know, I have to be realistic about it. You know?
Absolutely. I think we all need to be realistic.
Just one other thing I wanted to say is regarding, I've researched quite a bit regarding the best place to live if the economy goes belly under, and if there are a variety of climatic changes.
The economy is going belly under. I mean, let's just...
Yes.
I may also, you know, I think it's important not to be fear-based, but at the same time, some of you may be aware that, you know, with climatic changes, there may be certain earthquakes and certain large waves that may come along. The northern tablelands is very safe in respect of its height. We also need to have land which has water.
Yes, absolutely.
Water. The other thing I would like to point out is, even though places like Byron Bay and other places further in are more tropical and beautiful, the area that George is talking about was not really touched by the bushfires. It's higher up, and it seems to be a little bit more protected from those things. I mean, you want to think about that when you choose the land that you live on.
Consider everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the climate-wise, if it's 1,000 meters above the sea level, that suits my constitution better. I like it better because obviously it's less hot, less humid, so it's drier. So yeah, all that is fantastic. Yeah, I'm just, you know, wondering about the rest of the issues, and, you know, one has to be, I mean, I'm practical, you know me. You know, I just I live in so many different places that, you know, just I know there, you know, how much I have the capacity to cope with something, and how much I have capacity to make things happen, and how much I don't.
And that's
just one other point.
Can I just say, it would be really, it's Susan here, I'm just, I'd be really interested to hear from Michaela. You mentioned about all the different communities you've been in, and clearly had an enormous amount of experience. What worked? What actually stands out to you about the places that really worked?
A good question.
One of them was in Nimbin. Now, this is going back 20 years, mind you. But sure. So this was a well-established community. They all had their own separate titles of that collective land, right? So I think that having that individual ownership is really important, because if you have a block of land and you just are kind of random shareholders in the land, and you don't actually feel that ownership of your land, there's a lot more insecurity for people, and that's really important, because people want to know down the track, you know, if they do want to sell their portion of the land, that they have the opportunity to do that. They don't feel trapped there. That's a big part of it. I think definitely communication between, having clear guidelines, you do need some rules. You need things written down. You need regular community meetings so that
I agree.
And I wouldn't say I've had, and thanks for all the compliments, everyone, but I wouldn't say I've had I have had a fair bit of experience, but not recently. But yeah, I lived with different families, and I found that having those meetings on a regular basis, having that connection with everyone, having the ability to trade, you know, vegetables, if they have, you know, free range chickens and eggs, being able to trade within the community on a bartering system, having things strategically set up so that it's very highly organized. Because I found that places that didn't really have that level of organization, they just kind of ended up becoming quite chaotic, and there wasn't really a cohesive community in place. And so I feel like people felt more disconnected, and they ended up they didn't really have that sense of, that sense of connection and that sense of ownership, and that, yeah, they just ended up kind of just doing their own thing on their own little bit, and it just wasn't, and then it was just more transient. People would just kind of end up selling their part of the land and moving on if they just got disgruntled, or it just wasn't very cohesive with some of the other ones that I lived on. So being highly organized is just like any good organization, like having a really good structure in place, and just having clear guidelines, clear rules, I think was a really big part of it. And
totally agree.
Yeah, look, we have the wider group that I'm involved with have covered a lot of those issues, and if people are after individual ownership, that's like suburbia. It makes a lot of sense to keep it in one single title, just like the Bundajan community near the Coffs Harbour coast is set up. In a highly evolved society, there is no concept of ownership, right? And that's not to say that everybody's rights won't be protected. Of course they will. It's the structure you're talking about is paramount so people can know how it's set up, right? And there is documentation which I could share on how those things could be set up and how the economic model can work. You'll find that if you do put, say, 100 families on, say, a few hundred hectares, within a few years, they'll be self-sufficient. Within another few years, they'll be producing so much produce, and it's better than organic. It's actually homegrown, and you can put it out on the market, right? Now, each member, family members, domains, if we want to call them that, has its own land, but there is it's a collection of domains, right? It's not just everybody has their own individual houses and everybody does their own thing. It's a collective. These are the blueprints for humanity. We're supposed to be in tribal type, village type communities where everybody contributes to the good of the whole. That's just some of the philosophies.
Of course.
Yeah, I could share on those things.
Yeah, I do love the philosophy, and I agree that that's how tribal communities have absolutely existed for thousands of years. There's a lot can be said on that. While I think of it, I did want to touch on a few other points regarding like solar power and rainwater tanks and that kind of infrastructure. So do you have a plan? I also lived on 100 acres for a year, and I lived on 23 acres up in near Kyogle. Does anyone know where Kyogle is in northern New South Wales?
Yeah.
No.
It's inland from Byron Bay. It's up the Queensland border.
Yeah.
Kind of on the way to the Queensland border. Yeah. So, and lived off the grid, completely off the grid for 2 years up there when I was younger. So I was just wondering, and we're very fortunate now because solar technology has come a long way since then. I have a friend who lives off the grid in Kinglake who's a solar engineer, and I've seen it being done really, really successfully. And I worked in the solar industry as well, so in the US and here. So I'm really interested to know what kind of infrastructure plans you have for solar. And
those are simple items, right? If you want to set up a solar system, it's not difficult, right? It's a very well-established technologies, right? You're talking about.
Absolutely.
Now, there are problems with some people because a solar system generates dirty electricity, right? If it's not set up correctly, it can be a hazard, right? And electrosensitives, they try and blame the solar panels, but it's not the panels. It's actually the switching gear which creates these problems, right? And look, I'm an electronics engineer, and I'm aware that you should be able to filter those things out. But because the nature of power, of creating 240 volt AC power from DC batteries, it requires heavy duty filters, which are actually more expensive than the inverter. That's not to say that shouldn't be done. Of course it should be done in order to clean up the signal, right? So yeah, solar power, not a problem, right? We should be able to set those up quite easily. You know, there's other detailed issues like what's the internet going to be, right? And in the regions that we're talking about, it might actually be in the regions we're talking about.
Our own 5G.
Yeah.
Well, look, in the regions we're talking about, it's generally satellite communication, right?
Right.
And satellite communication doesn't leak radiation. It's a very solid pencil-thin beam which communicates to the satellite, and it seems to work quite well. You know, there might be other solutions.
Yeah, well, the good news is, some good news is Elon Musk is investing heavily into satellite internet. So there is actually going to be a lot more affordable access to satellite internet moving forward once there's more infrastructure. And someone like Elon Musk obviously has the money to do it. So yeah, so that's a positive thing.
Well, Elon Musk is planning to put 5G satellites in space.
Oh no, that's no good.
Well, it's another issue, right? It's not necessarily to beam 5G radiation down from space, because it's that signal won't be a problem. The problem with 5G is the installations on the terra firma, you know, on the terrestrial connections, which, you know, will be put around big cities and towns, right? In your own single title rural cooperative, there won't be any incentive to have a 5G system, and there might even have to be restrictions on people's use of mobile phones. Keep that in mind, because that's part of the agenda, which is damaging life. It's damaging all the population. One of the reasons we particularly like this area is because there's very, very large blocks for sale, and some of the people have already got those large expanses of land.
Fantastic.
And, you know, they're on single title and could possibly be used for this sort of purpose, right? But yeah, what was raised before about how to practically do it without inviting an invasion of so-called authority, that's very important item. And if you look at our YouTube channel, there's people working at a level. Some of the presentations there are telling us there are ways to deal with those authoritarian structures which are out of control. You know, if you look into it very deeply, we don't have governments anymore. They're all corporations, and very carefully we must look at we can look at the idea of changing the consciousness so that those frameworks eventually become redundant. We can't fight them. It's too big a monster.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anybody else that wants to provide some insights? There's Helena, there's Vass, we've heard from, I think, Dragon, Elizabeth, Lebaloo, Tony. Anybody else? Helena wants to say something. You got to turn on your microphone.
Hello.
Oops, sorry, I turned you off again. Okay, go now, Helena.
Hello everyone.
Hi.
What I've been doing the last 2 years is trying to find, looking around, but I can't make up my mind. I was, looking to buy land. I haven't got that much experience. I can build. I have built structures before, as well as I grew up without electricity, and both my grandparents, they grew all their fruit and veg. And just totally everything that we had was either bread my grandmothers made, eggs, yogurt, butter, the whole works. Fruit and veg was all homegrown. So what I was wanting to do was find a piece of land, but I don't want to do it on my own. So my whole thing was finding some land, not necessarily, if it had an old shack on it, that's good, but not having to. And I was thinking, building, like you were saying before, a central kitchen, bathroom area, and then people just having their own, whether that's, probably a tiny house, because you're not going to get into trouble with the council with that. Caravans, that's true. I've looked into that, and you can only sleep in a caravan 2 months of the year, and it can only be at 2 nights at a time. But, you could have a few caravans there if somebody, wanted to change, because at the moment I've got a business in Richmond, and I've been closed down for the last month, but out the back of the shop I've got a caravan. I've been sleeping in that, because it's just easier for me while I'm at work, instead of travelling to my house in Bayswater North, stay here.
Oh, I live around the corner from you. I'm in Ringwood North, so I know Bayswater.
Well, my house is in Bayswater North, and my younger son and my mother live there with another friend.
Ah.
Yeah, so, but because my business is in Richmond, I originally got this caravan. I just love small spaces. I love tiny houses. I love caravans. I've built small, like 1 bedroom kind of, just traditional stud, plasterboard. Just got a whole lot of timber, double sash hung windows off of eBay. I built something like a decently sized, nice bedroom for, a couple of $1,000 just with it all stuff off eBay, recycled materials. But
that's great.
Yeah, so I'm 59, but I'm, I just like building stuff. I like putting stuff together, but and growing. But that's what I really I was keen on doing. And so, but then when this came up, I thought, great, because there's a community already there. I haven't bought the land, but I don't know nothing about solar panels or electricity, and I don't know nothing about all that side of things. So I'm very keen, but I think you definitely need to have a whole lot of kind of like a Bible of what's expected and what the community stands for. But what I think is going to be the biggest problem, just from people, it doesn't have to be a problem, but where there's going to be a lot of hiccups, just through friends of mine that have lived in different communities, usually up north, is just personality clashes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important, because I find that in every community, we are not, extended families. We are all coming from different backgrounds, from different ages. We don't even know each other. We are trying to create something that is very sort of creative, ideal, but it doesn't mean that is that practical any longer. So we have to be, and we are all adults. So we have to foresee the possible clashes, possibility of, upheaval, and then maybe even war between ourselves.
All
So
right. Well,
I'm joking about that, but if there are all these possibilities, and one has to really clarify before you get into yourself into the thing. We are not 16 years old anymore.
So I think that's where there are known models, and that's where what Michaela's experience and those communities and other people's experience in those kinds of places, because it's when people have an ideal that they're heading for and it's being very practically fleshed out how we're going to go about it, that and people have done that. There's Renew magazine has some fantastic stories in it from the Alternative Technology Association, what people have managed to do in cooperative housing things in Victoria and elsewhere. There's plenty of stories out there, so it's really a matter of doing the homework as to what makes something really work. And so, and part of that, I'm still interested in just one aspect, because there's a fair bit to flesh out to make something work. What Michaela was talking about, the communities that worked, people owned their part and they could sell it. I mean, surely there's a way to do that within the one title still. You know, I just wonder how those, because I just think of Mora Mora, for example, that I had a bit of contact with people at Mora Mora, which is up in sort of Healesville direction. I'm pretty sure it's still going. People did sell out of there. But it sounded a bit more like what Michaela was saying, that people kind of went, oh, I've had enough of this and left. But some people stayed. But I think to make a community viable in the long term, you actually do have to have a way of allowing people to leave as well. That needs to be in the plan from the beginning as just realistic.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
So sorry, there's a couple of things there, but one practical thing would be, how do you, like, human beings do like to own things, so then how do you make just Michaela was saying that it worked better when people had some sense of actual ownership, but that's possible within one title, surely.
Look, there are structures which cover those situations. Right. I couldn't hear a lot of the audio, but there's a model which kind of works rather well. I've shown many documentaries of how communities are set up, and we've been to many of those communities. There's a particular one from Europe called a New We, and it talks about well, it comes from other places as well. The westernized mindset is very individual. Now, that becomes a problem when people are put into a community type situation, whereas the eastern side, they can be more communal because it's in their lifestyle in a way. You know, like, for example, if you go to Bali and you go to some of the villages, it's a proliferation of children, mums and dads, uncles and aunties, grandparents, parents, great-grandparents, all living, not in each other's shoes, but they've all got their own places, and it works very well. That's an example of a highly evolved society, you could say, right? The westernized mindset is, I want this, I want that. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it can lead to some problems. And so what they came up with, instead of democracy, which is a system which marginalizes the minority, right? For example, if you're electrosensitive, you're only 3% of the population. Who cares about you, right? That doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Now, in the highly evolved systems, they have what's known as consensus, right? In other words, everyone has to agree. Now, that's difficult to implement in a Western context. because people are so individual. And so they came up with a concept called modified consensus. Now, it's usually the same people that keep objecting to ideas over and over again. And so if somebody does object, especially if it's habitual, they have to form a committee where people are going to attend and find out why the objection is happening, right? And that usually shuts down the rampant objections. So there are models which have worked and do work based on this idea, right? Yeah, if you're trying to come from scratch with your own ideas, that's great. However, there are some very well structured ideas which have come up with the solutions. Now, it's interesting that when we went to the Bundajan community, and that's about 30 years going strong, when we went there, a lot of the founders of that community were there, and they started off as a hippie type situation, and they gave us quite a bit of time, and they said to us, don't do the hippie thing. In other words, you've got to have structure, right? This is not about doing what you like. You've got to have structure and guidelines which prevent people transgressing on others. You know, like if there's a boundary that a domain has, if somebody disturbs that boundary, they can be expelled. It can be very serious item to ignore. And so some of those things would have to be set up, and you have a council of members, not a council, a council of members who generally do the administration, and it requires everyone to interact, right? You don't want a collective where people start disappearing into their own little adobes and we never see from them again. That's not going to be a functional community, right? I'm just sharing information of models that have worked. There's a fascinating model, one of the most successful communities that occurred in Australia, which was in the 1970s, called Universal Brotherhood. And I can share some quite deep information about that and how successful it was. Trouble was, it all collapsed in one foul swoop because there were management problems, right? So it's got to work both ways, right? You don't want to take control of the community to the point that you're suppressing it. And that's what happened to that community. There's lots of models which I've worked with. And if you're going to choose a model, this is my suggestion, you choose the highest possible model, right? Ones that highly evolved societies use. And there are examples of that on Earth as well as elsewhere in the galaxy, but I won't go into that. So anyway.
I like that, George. I like everything you just said. That was very informative. And thank you for bringing up those different models and different solutions. And
it's been done before, right? And why would you choose anything less than the highest model? For the community?
I remember I watched Universal Brotherhood with you. I mean, it was actually kind of disturbing to watch how that fell apart. It was awful seeing it fall apart like that, honestly. But
all right.
But anyhow.
Anyway.
Would you mind just briefly, maybe not a big long thing, but maybe just briefly elsewhere in the galaxy? I mean, that's tantalising to say. I won't go into that, even though you just mentioned it. I'm curious.
Oh, you're curious about the higher level information?
Higher models in
I think that's what you're asking. I think that's what you're asking.
You just mentioned elsewhere in the galaxy, and then you said you wouldn't say more. But I'm
Rainbow City.
Look, that's a very deep subject, and there's heaps of information I could share on that. But I'll need to keep it brief. And sometimes people think if you start talking in those terms, they think you're absolutely kooky, right? But it is self-evident that we are not the only intelligent species in the universe, right? And there are races which are actually looking after us. We are a very young race, and it's not surprising that we're having difficulty finding our way, right? We're actually in a tricky situation now because we can actually evolve technologically without evolving spiritually, and that, I mentioned that early on in the presentation. That's a nightmarish future, right? It's a very
that is my nightmare, really.
It's actually very functional, but it means you won't have any human contact. You'll be cooped up in your own cubicle and totally controlled. You know, when you wake, when you sleep, when you eat, when you shit, everything. And procreation would be something in a test tube, right? It's not huge. It's a nightmare. And the information I use describes those scenarios, and I would say you would not like it, right? I'm not saying I'm not anti-technology. It's supposed to be a balance between technology and cosmology, and there are races which are so far advanced on us, but they're not allowed to interfere with our free will.
Right. Yeah.
Right. There are actually races which are benevolent. There's many benevolent races which help to look after us, but there's also a bunch of malevolent races, the ones that have evolved technologically only, right? And they've got the technology and the power to come on Earth and invade us, right? But they don't.
It seems that they are doing a good job.
Anyway, I'll explain why they don't. It's because there's higher dimensional beings, right? We're talking about levels of life way beyond where we are, and they stop the malevolent races invading us. Right? It's not allowed, right? Because it would be interfering with our free will. However, there is one race we're not safe from. Do you know what that race is?
Human race.
The human race, that's correct.
Humanity.
We have this is what free will and free choice is about. We can actually destroy ourselves if we so please. I don't recommend it, right? But if that's the collective decision, there's nothing we can do. And that's okay. It's happened before. We've had cataclysms, both natural and man-made, on this planet before, and they happen on a regular occurrence, apparently. Usually, the race comes back quite strong. Anyway, I hope that answered your question.
This is really fascinating. Do you like Greg Braden's work?
Oh yeah,
Greg
Braden.
Yeah.
He's a biological scientist, let's say, and he's done some brilliant work. And Greg Braden is one of the ones that identified that we didn't go through the prophesized cataclysms which were supposed to happen in the early 1990s. He noticed that the earthquakes that were supposed to happen did not happen, and that's only because the consciousness of humanity raised. And there was a number of special events like the harmonic convergence of 1987 and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And, for example, material that I was guided to back in the 1980s, which got me meditating on healing the earth. I would say millions of people were also inspired to meditate on that same idea. The harmonic convergence itself was a mass worldwide meditation that raised the consciousness so that we don't have to go through catastrophe. Right? That's another deep subject. So we're getting somewhere. It's hard work, but the signs are good. There's definitely an attack on us, and we don't just lie and we don't just put up with the abuse. We need to do something about it, and that's part of the activism. But make sure you're an active creator rather than just a pure activist. That's what I'd recommend anyway.
Can I ask, this is Michaela again, can I ask, does anyone have any experience with Amish communities?
Amish?
No.
Oh, I played some of the documentaries.
I know about them. Yeah, the same here.
Breaking up, George.
I don't, but I have read a lot about them. They're very fascinating. Why do you ask?
It's a good model.
Yeah, because they have a lot. Yeah, we have a lot to learn from their communities, because they have been highly successful. You know, literally for centuries. I mean, multi-generational families and communities that are very high functioning. So, and I don't know if anyone's heard of Ty Lopez, but he actually lived with an Amish community for about 2.5 years. And now he's completely doing his own thing. He's on a whole different, trip in life. But he's a very successful entrepreneur. But he humbly started early in life living on an Amish community. And I think he's taken a lot of those values along with him. But yeah, I think that's a model, obviously not the religious side of the Amish, because they are
that's right.
fundamental Christian religion, which I have nothing against, but obviously that's not something that we,
becomes cultish. You don't want to be in a cult when it comes to religious.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call the Amish a cult. I'd say they're more of a it's a religion, just like, well, I wouldn't compare it to Buddhism, but they've been highly successful. They're highly organized. They're multi-generational. They're self-sufficient more so than almost any other. Gosh,
there's a group
and they do amazing stuff, but they do. It's not perfect, and
sure.
I don't think we can separate out, because I'm familiar with Christianity, and I love it. There's a way we can't separate out the religion from the practice, because the whole thing goes together for them. And
that's true.
It kind of cherry picking, and cherry picking doesn't work. And so the Amish aren't they're amazing what they do achieve, and I do admire them. But there are some holes that there's environmental destruction. They have amazing waste products that are actually doing damage to the environment around them. And in terms of their home birth, they do still draw on external midwives when they have huge difficulties. So most of the time they manage their own births, but so they're largely self-sufficient, but there's ways they haven't been, well, in Christian terms, good stewards of the earth, that it's not complete.
Sure.
We've played several. We play several documentaries on the Amish because of their achievements. However, they do have management problems, and a lot of people have left the Amish and gone to other religious communities because of their strict management regime. Right, so it's not perfect. There are other very well organised religious groups, and religion is useful because it's like a glue. It glues everybody together, right? Because you've got some clear guidelines, but it's not perfect. I'm not sure if I could live in a religious atmosphere. I'm sure I could, but I would.
Maybe short term I could, not long term. Yeah.
It depends on how they run it. And what I've seen of the Amish is, I would call it somewhat fundamentalist. And those communities risk that. But I have been to religious communities in Australia where the tone of the management is quite inspiring. I refer in particular to the Jamboree Abbey, where the sisters do it. The tone is amazing. But I don't know whether they're doing much of a self-sufficient you know, growing their own thing, and there's a sort of stultifying aspect to Christianity that hampers them, I would say. They've got some strengths, but there's some weaknesses too. So, yeah. But very interesting that you've looked at the Amish story more. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm wondering about whether we should wrap up soon. I haven't heard from Lee B. Lou. Do you want to say anything, Lee B. Lou? Or?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Lee?
you. Yes.
Okay. I've just been sitting back and listening and taking it all in.
Cool.
One thing I thought was that we only have problems with council because we don't really stand up and identify as the living men and women that we are. They consider us to be fictitious entities.
Yep.
And we come under their control by identifying as that. So I don't know if you think it's like valuable for us to all, I guess, re-establish who we are.
That's
Reality
exactly
is they
what
can
we need to.
Reality is they can come and demolish your house if it's not up to council code. They'll just bring in bulldozers and they'll just demolish your house.
Look, if it's done properly, that won't happen, right? That doesn't happen.
No, it won't happen.
Right.
I agree, it doesn't have to. It's totally avoidable. But if you don't play by the rules, then I've seen it happen countless. Yeah.
Have you seen it happen to someone who really has established with those people who we are? Because our silence is our consent to their rules.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you.
Remains. Yeah.
Yeah, it happened not that long ago at a community. I think it was in Queensland. I was just reading about it. I'll try to look up the article for you guys. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, but if they hadn't established who they are in the eyes of the corrupt government, they're viewed as coming under their domain.
Look, those councils that you're referring to do not have any lawful power, and there are ways to deal with those situations. You have to know what you're doing.
Exactly.
And the straw man is what I was talking about earlier. Beyond the straw man is a presentation I did a couple of weeks ago. It's on YouTube. And there are ways to, if you know who you are, it's a very powerful process. Right? And if you do that collectively, it's that much more powerful. I'm not saying we're not going to have problems, right? But that's part of the opportunity for us to grow and evolve as who we are. We are creators. We are. We have the essence of the creator being the created, but in fact there is no difference. We are the highest authority in our own lives. Why would there be anybody else of higher authority telling us what to do? Only because we are silent and we don't do anything about that. Anyway, so.
Which can I say, I mean, I think you can't fight people half-heartedly. We either decide that we're going to take them on full force, head on, do whatever is necessary to establish our sovereignty, or we don't, because you're looking at getting the, I think Michaela's right. You know, if you try to do this half-heartedly and try to sneak around and everything, they're going to come in and demolish it. I mean, you either stand your ground and fight, or you don't, I think. I don't think there's any sneaking around or pretending.
Well, no, not sneaking around.
I agree.
Games.
Making sure you know their laws.
They're going to see the people there and say, we don't like this. That's it. You didn't comply. And you either stand and fight or you don't. I mean, it's like you either obey the rules or you don't. And it's,
I think it's back to what George was saying earlier, is if you know the rules, then you can, you can work out how to break them. It's just that you do need to know the rules and you need to know what you're dealing with. And you need to know what happened in the situations Michaela was talking about. And then, so you're dealing with reality. And I think that's probably one of the big challenges of communities. And I think it's really smart to that whole having rules that you can't break or you're out. That kind of, the structure is taking itself that seriously. And doesn't mess with just pretending and putting their head in the sand about things, but actually deals with things. And I don't know if I like that idea of the consensus, but with that extra thing of the people who object all the time have to deal with it. That's
Yeah. All right. Well, what about? We haven't heard from Vass, Tony, and Thoran. Got anything to say? You don't have to. But I think we need to wrap it up unless you've got something to share.
George, I just, with regard to Greg Braden as being a beacon of light, I saw his presentation on COVID-19 and he sounded like a spokesperson for the World Health Organization. It's a very interesting watch about
which
what
one?
he has to say about it all.
Okay.
Sorry, which one?
I was saying that Greg Braden, the beacon of light, his presentation on COVID-19, you can see it on YouTube. He sounded like a spokesperson for the World Health Organization. It's a very interesting watch in terms of where he's coming from and what his role might be in the whole larger scheme of things.
Gosh.
I see.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's interesting.
back to communities just briefly. Could Michaela, I don't know, you might not be willing, but the Nimbin community that works so well, are you able to name it?
This was 20 years ago. I could definitely look it up for you and give you the name once I've looked it up, but it was 20 years ago. I lived on the community. I worked with different families there. Gosh, I'd have to look it up, but I do think it's still going. It was very well established, and there were families, like one of the families that I stayed with were teachers, and they had kids, and I think part of it was that they also had their roles in the outside, like in the wider community, and they kind of brought that, so they weren't just specifically trying to completely live off the land. They had jobs, it can work either way, but they all had lives of their own, and then they brought a wealth of all those different skills and experience back to the community and incorporated it there. But they also had, chooks and ducks and fruit trees and veggie gardens and bartering and all that kind of stuff. So it was just kind of a really nice balance between, they weren't going to any full-on extremes, and I think that's why they found that nice balance between still being able to live their lives and have jobs and be teachers and be in a wider community, and then also being a part of that really small, close-knit local community on the land. But yeah, I'll have to look it up because it has been so long. And I don't have phone numbers or anything. I used to, but yeah, it's been so long. But I was really impressed. Whereas I stayed on a place up in the Atherton Tablelands up in far north Queensland, and that was a bit some craziness. It was pretty cool. Like, it was an amazing alternative. It was like an alternate reality almost. Like, it was so outside of my box. But yeah, I think a few people who took a lot of LSD in the 60s and kind of, yeah, gosh, there was one guy who was a little bit crazy, and he was kind of renowned. He was kind of famous for that, but he would just go on and on about how he found this huge crystal amethyst cave and someone stole it from him, and he was just, yeah, there was some people who were just a little bit way off the deep end at that one. So yeah, and then has anyone heard of that really famous hippie commune in Cedar Bay in far north Queensland? It's up past Cooktown.
No.
Yeah, it's really, really far north Queensland. I hiked in there with my boyfriend back, gosh, I was like 17 at the time, and the Joh Bjelke-Petersen government actually came in there and destroyed the whole hippie commune. And it was really like big news at the time. It was back in the 1970s, and they spent, like, the government spent over $50,000, and they had helicopters and a Navy vessel, and they arrested like 12 people on drug charges, and it was like this big bust thing. Like, and they, when we hiked in there, we actually found like old deserted fruit tree orchards, and it was pretty cool actually. But yeah, it was a very famous hippie commune that got destroyed by the government, which is really sad, because who knows, like, the government likes to, they don't want people to be that free, and they don't, who knows, there could have been a lot of drugs involved. I don't know the whole story. It was back in the 70s. So
all right, well, when should we get together again? How soon should we do these things? Should we look at Monday or Friday or the following Monday? There's other presentations that will be coming up from myself or somebody else or whoever else was got some good material to share. If there's,
oh my God.
What?
Sorry, go on. I just found one of these communities, and one of the ladies looks really familiar because she's got like this big red box chair that looks super. I don't know if it's the same place, but it's a community. Sorry to interrupt. It's a community that's been going since 1973, and it's 40 years later. Let's see, maybe this is even an old article, because that would have been this is back in 2013. But it's a multiple occupancy community near Nimbin, and it's been going in the Tuntable Valley, which sounds really familiar. And it's still going successfully 40 years later. And one of the ladies moved up there from Melbourne. Let's see. Tuntable Falls. It's 2,000 acres in the valley, and there's about 200 people living on the community. They started everything from scratch, and let's see, it's a really good article. I don't know how, it's on my phone, so I don't know how I would link it to this call, but I guess I could post it on Facebook.
Yeah, well, just tell us what it is now.
Oh, sure. Well, it just says it's a community near Nimbin, the Tuntable Valley. And it doesn't say, it just says hippie counterculture community thrives 40 years on. And it started with this Aquarius festival. That's kind of how everyone was brought together. But I know Tuntable Falls community. There we go. Tuntable Falls community. Situated on 2,000 acres in a valley. So if you Google search that, you should be able to find some stuff on that.
You want to chat it? Do you want to type it in the chat window?
Oh, sure. Yeah, give me one sec. Tuntable.
Pull the plug.
I'm tired.
I'll get this message.
Otherwise they can talk.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
I typed it in and I pressed return, but it's not. Hang on, it's not going in.
Press the down arrow and
Okay.
send it to everyone.
Oh, there we go. I made it work. Thank you. Good advice. Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with Tuntable Falls, yeah.
Yeah, Tuntable Falls. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Have you been? I'm pretty sure I went to that one, but it's, yeah, like I said, it's been a long time. So.
Yeah, that had a lot of antagonism through groups trying to take it over, and substance abuse and all that sort of thing. But anyway, that's one of some of the stories I've heard.
Sure, it wasn't the one that I was referring to before that was in Nimbin. This is a different one.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we need to pull the plug. So I'll keep everybody informed on another session. There's a bunch of stuff which we didn't cover, but you know, there's only limited time, and if you like, respond to that Obla D5G, that proton mail thing, and they're building up a collection of people on that. And yeah, Vass has just appeared, and anything left to say, or do we say goodnight?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you so much to George.
Yes, thank you.
And yeah, really learned a lot.
All right, well, thank you very
so
much.
much for having me. Yeah. Good night.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Good night.
All the best.